April 1917, the French Third Republic. 2 lance corporals are given a mission to save the lives of 1,600 men from certain doom in the Hindenburg Line. Through the trenches, through guns, bombs, airplanes, and through every obstacle in between, these men give their full devotion and lives in the service of their nation in 1917. A marriage in the process of a messy coastal divorce with the life of their son in the balance, as well as their own professions and their sanity. A marriage story. Hollywood glamour in the 1960s, 2 men basically looking at the end of their respective careers, one an actor and the other a stunt double, with the ever-changing atmosphere and culture in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The relationship of organized crime and organized labor go hand in hand in The Irishman. These are just some of the stories from this year's Academy Awards. Welcome to the 9th annual Eric's View Academy Awards special. I'm your host, Eric Rosen, and with me again are the Fab Four right here. That's right. Let's start off, Mr. Keith Gregory Taylor.
Oh, that's me. Hello, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Miss Melanie Randall.
Hello. I didn't prepare a statement this time.
Did you last time?
No.
Mr. Gary Bradley.
Hey, how's it going? Green Book didn't deserve it, so let's try again this year.
Oh, my.
We had this argument.
No. And Mr. Charlie Sullivan.
Great to be here, Eric. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Really, I appreciate having you guys here again. You guys were beautiful and fantastic last year, so why not have you guys here again?
Aw,
Well, that's why we had you back, Eric.
I always love being here. Now, usually what we do is at the beginning of our show, we have a topic of discussion. Last year was about diversity in the film industry. This year, the lack of female diversity in this year's Best Director category. Only 5 women in the history of the Academy Awards have been nominated. One of them has won, Catherine Bigelow for 2009's The Hurt Locker. The last being Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird. Why the heck was she not nominated this year for Little Women, along with several other women? Let's get into that. What's your feelings on
Let's
this?
interview this male-dominated panel.
5 males.
Let's mansplain it.
Oh.
Okay. Yes, let's have the Famali speak first.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't see any of the female-directed films, so I can't speak to that. I mean, as a woman, it is upsetting and almost discouraging going into this industry and knowing that that's like the battle you have to fight right out the gate. But I have hope that we're getting better. There were a lot of strong movies, and just because they happen to be directed by men doesn't mean necessarily that we were snubbed, but there were definitely nominees that should have been more strongly considered.
Especially Lulu Wang for The Farewell. You were mentioning earlier Marianne Heller for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. There was also, Greta Gerwig for Little Women. And even years ago, for Selma, what's her name, that did the film about the Central Park Five?
Ava?
Ava DuVernay, who should have been nominated even for that film. So there have been some women who have been overlooked, and it's kind of an injustice in a sense to me.
I think the trouble is, I guess I'll ask you, Melanie, what would you rather? Would you rather the women were given an equal opportunity to be nominated, and knowing that, or that once a year or every 2 years, you just get one woman in there as kind of a token?
Well, I don't want women to be a token or given like, oh, we'll definitely nominate one woman, because that's
like a
kind
woman's
of
slot.
Right,
you know?
right.
That's demeaning.
Mm-hmm. Right. Honestly, I think the whole problem is there just aren't enough movies being directed by women.
Right, and that's a systemic problem. That's not
Right.
that's not a quality problem. That's because they're not funded, and the films that are funded oftentimes don't get enough distribution.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem this year, I think, is that there were women who their films should have been nominated. They should have been nominated for Best Director, but they may not have had campaigns behind them the way that that you have major campaigns behind some of these films, especially like the net. I know there's a huge Netflix money going in. There was a lot of money behind several of the different films.
Especially The Irishman with Scorsese, there was a
Right.
lot of
Like a
advertising
juggernaut.
for that.
And how does a woman director who doesn't have that backing, how do they compete on that level? Because it's not just quality, it's also it's the economics of it, and that's the real unfairness as far as I can see.
This completely echoes to what we were saying last year. It was about, the diversity last year versus the diversity this year. There's no diversity this year.
Right.
It is outside of Cynthia Erivo, it is just all white, acting nominees, and that's because there was so many in 2018 that there was none up for discussion in 2019. It goes in cycles. At the Tony Awards, it was Hamilton and Color Purple dominated one year,
Yeah.
and then the next year, people were like, "Oh, it's back to business as usual." You can't really blame awards if the projects aren't getting funded.
Well, the other thing though, with this year, I do think like there's one. To me, Todd Phillips should never have been nominated for the
100%.
Joker. So to me, there was a slot, and if I didn't see all the films, but certainly The Farewell, that director did a fantastic job on that film. Far more of creative directing than Todd Phillips on the Joker. So to me, at least that example is very clear. And I think there were probably other. I didn't see Little Women, so I don't know about Greta Gerwig, but there were strong projects with strong female directors that didn't get that slot, and that's unfair.
Greta Gerwig, I saw Little Women. It was probably my favorite adaptation. I know some people say that's sacrilege considering with Katharine Hepburn, the version in the 1930s.
Yeah, they were all in that was not an age match particularly well in that version. A lot of the actresses were not the right age for the parts, but
in this one, I loved the modern day take they had on it. It was very non-lineal, the way they connected the stories from that 7-year gap and how everything came together towards the end. I thought it was beautifully done. So really, I thought it was an injustice, at least for Greta Gerwig, to not even get consideration for this film.
Yeah.
It was my favorite adaptation. I didn't even honestly like the Winona Ryder version, 94.
yeah,
Sorry.
that's
It's
not much like
not a
that.
very hot
She's
take,
offended.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, Winona.
Yeah,
Is
she's
she
gonna,
here?
Yeah, she's currently on Stranger Things,
Stranger
or if they're even doing another season for all I know. Anyway, so I think what in the future, I think more women are definitely we're gonna get more nominees. I would even say Olivia Wilde with her first film Booksmart. We're gonna probably see her in the future get a Best Directing nod at some point.
Elizabeth Banks for Charlie's Angels 2, possibly.
Or Patty Jenkins, who's done the Wonder Woman films. I could definitely see her at some point.
Oh my God, so good.
So segue, you're talking about Greta Gerwig. I believe we're going to be discussing this, and
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
yeah.
Let's get into now that we got this topic under discussion, let's get into the
through line.
let's get into the awards that we always discuss every year, starting with the nominees for Best Adapted Screenplay. And they are Steve Zalian for The Irishman, based on the novel I Hear You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt. Taika Waititi for Jojo Rabbit, based on the novel Caging Skies by Christine Lunens. Todd Phillips and Scott Silver for Joker, based on the DC comic character by Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson. Greta Gerwig for Little Women, based on novel Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. And lastly, The Two Popes, Anthony McCartan, who wrote the film, and it's based on the play from 2017, The Pope by Anthony McCartan.
Oh, I didn't realize that was from a play.
Yeah.
Wow.
So where do you guys see this going?
It's going to Greta Gerwig.
I concur.
Yeah,
has to.
I think it's the Ben Affleck effect when it was like he didn't get nominated for
Absolutely.
Argo, and then Argo somehow won Best
Absolutely.
Picture. That's. I think she's absolutely winning.
I gotta
for
say
that.
though, Jojo Rabbit, that was one of the most insane scripts I've seen in a while. What a film! Like it's crazy and really interesting, and goes in so many different directions. Like that to me, I mean, I agree. Greta Gerwig's going to get it, but that deserves some accolades. Woof, that was an amazing script.
What do we have to think about this?
Yes, that's what I meant to say. And
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Gary. I think it's going to go to Greta Gerwig. Just not even just the Ben Affleck effect, just the controversy or the acknowledgement of the lack of female
Definitely.
acknowledgement at the Oscars this year. I think that's probably why she'll get it.
Yeah.
And having not seen it, I really can't say it's inappropriate for her to win.
But it's a chance for her to
I
give a
think it's
pointed speech, too, which is
Absolutely.
always fun.
And
The only one I've seen is the Joker, and honestly, and I don't know if this is a popular opinion or not, it wasn't my Joker. Like, I didn't look at that story as really a Joker storyline.
No,
like, it was
it
an
didn't.
interesting concept, and I like the way that they played with certain aspects of it, and I like how they tied in mental health and all of these social issues. But if you're basing it off of a character from DC, he wasn't that character, so I don't really see it earning that award.
I definitely say Greta Gerwig's Little Women. If there is to be an upset, I would have to say Steve Zalian for The Irishman. Granted, they could have cut maybe an hour from that film, but what I did like about the movie was just, the moralistic story, of right and wrong, of seeing Frank Sheeran going through this internal decision in his head whether or not he should commit the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. Of course, Jimmy Hoffa is like the biggest political figure in the 50s to the 70s, the head of one of the biggest organized labor unions in the country, the Teamsters. And, as I mentioned earlier, the link between organized crime and labor unions went hand in hand in those days. And the fact that Jimmy Hoffa had to open his mouth and say, I know things about these people that it's going to hurt them. When you saw that moment in the film, you were like, yep, you know what's going to end up happening to this guy. You wish he just would have just kept his mouth quiet, stopped, not do anything. Even Frank Sheeran, played by Robert De Niro, was like, oh my God, I don't know if I should do this. But there was that pivotal scene where Al Pacino and De Niro were in the diner, and Al Pacino, as Robert Bufalino says, you know it's going to happen. It's going to come down. So you got to do it. We tried everything. We tried to talk him down. So, and I think Steve Zalian is a creative screenplay writer, but at the end of the day, Greg Gerwig, congratulations. At least you got this. Now, the next category, Best Original Screenplay, and they are Rian Johnson for Knives Out, Noah Baumbach for Marriage Story, Sam Mendes and Christy Wilson Cairns for 1917, Quentin Tarantino for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Bong Joon-ho and Han Jin-win for Parasite. Ooh, this is a good one.
Tough category. Those are some excellent scripts.
Shout out to Rian Johnson, who I think the only person with a script nominated that's not nominated for Best Picture. This year there was 10 nominees. There's 9 nominees for Best Picture, so Knives Out was the one to slip in. Tougher than adapted, for sure.
And not only that, this is the only award they're even nominated for.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Huh.
I
That
know.
makes me kind of want them to win. I haven't even
I
seen
wasn't
it, but
impressed
I'm
with that
like,
movie.
It's
At all.
a very creative
Not enough Toni Collette.
murder mystery.
Not nearly enough.
Well, Toni Collette you had in there. You had Curtis, of course, and but it was, Daniel Craig, of course, was like, along with Ana de Armas, the two of them were going to be working together in the next Bond film, No Time to Die. I certainly liked the whole murder mystery aspect of it. But anyway, where do you guys go with this? What's your pick?
It's really hard.
I give it to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood due to the fact that Marriage Story, 1917, Parasite did not have the level of dialogue that Quentin Tarantino is renowned for. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, just like The Irishman, had a very long runtime. You didn't feel it half as much with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You really just wanted to hang out with these people and just kick it back, and you were always interested in what they had to say. Whereas The Irishman, you were always kind of checking your watch and
Oh yeah,
being like, let's wrap it up.
they should have wrapped it up, especially at the scene where Bufalino died. That could have been the end of that film, as opposed
Bufalino dies?
to in The Irish, as opposed to Once Upon a Time. I could have stayed in that film for another half hour if they wanted me to.
Yeah.
that's good.
And I think it's just a testament to he's a writer. I mean, he's a director, but long after the films are forgotten, I think his scripts and his style of how he writes a scene is going to linger on, especially his slow burns. People go into these movies always looking for like the gunfight or the big fight scene, but it's always those quieter moments that are the really resonating ones. in his motion pictures. So
Yeah, I mean,
so that's my vote.
But given that this is original screenplay, a part of it is also the story. They came up with not just the dialogue, but also the tale. And that's what makes it hard for me, because I agree, Quentin Tarantino is great at writing dialogue. But when you think about the story that is 1917 and the way that the story is told, even though there's relatively, probably far less dialogue in that film than there is in most of the others, the way that the story is crafted, I thought was fascinating and told in a very familiar story. There's a play called Journey's End that deals with almost exactly, it's the same war in the bunkers with an older soldier and a younger soldier, but it's telling the story in an entirely new way. Same with, I mean, Parasite is on there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that film is bonkers. And if you, I think in part it's hard for us to judge the quality of the dialogue because it's spoken in a language that most of us don't know. So we don't know how poetic it is or how clever it is. We're getting a translation, which is always a step down. But in terms of coming up with that story and where it goes, it was like a fever dream. You know, it's like I was like, how does this possibly take this turn and that turn? And that's some masterful storytelling. It's hard to judge it on the dialogue part. On dialogue, how do you get better than Quentin Tarantino? You have to go back to like Frank Capra or those movies back then. But for me, Parasite is an incredible story, and I would like at least have honorable mention for that.
I'm having the exact same battle because something about 1917, like, I guess I have a soft spot for historical fiction because I said a similar thing about The Favorite. You just take this moment that we know happened and you just develop this whole story behind it. And I was so invested in that movie, even to like the smallest character. And yeah, it didn't have a lot of dialogue, but just the way the story moved was just, you were just in it the whole time. And I mean, the one shot definitely helped. So like I'm kind of fighting between, was it really like the cinematography or the screenplay that makes
it's hard
it
to
so,
separate it out.
Yeah, but the same thing about Parasite. Despite the fact that it's in a different language, which honestly I almost forget sometimes.
Yeah.
Because like I
was
just
a
didn't even
poetry to it,
acknowledge
you know?
it. Yeah. And like just hearing them talk, like they have the same inflections that we do. So it's not like it was completely alien, and it's just so effortless. And I had such a hard time like finding the villainy in people because they wrote them so human that you like almost have a hard time arguing who's the bad guy.
Yeah.
But like, and the ending is just
It just blows
out of control.
Right?
It is
Crazy. The other thing about 1917 is it might not have as much dialogue, but you remember all of those scenes. The Andrew Scott scene, the scene, like those are some amazing bits of dialogue along the way.
They have some big names doing some like
How
little sections.
great was that? Just picking up a paycheck for like one day's work because we needed the name.
Benedict
Benedict
Cumberbatch.
and Mark Strong and.
It was
good.
seeing him, Colin Firth, seeing Mark Strong.
Yeah.
Like it was, and what I liked about 1917 was it felt like two different scenes that taking place, and I loved how you went from one place to the next, and you didn't know what was going to happen. Kept you at the edge of your
Truly
seat.
did not know what was going to happen next.
And the sound effects were. It's going to win sound editing, definitely sound mixing. It should win cinematography because Roger Deakins, if you've seen his work, especially in Spectre and Skyfall, which he has worked in the past with Sam Mendes. In fact, 1917 is a story about Sam Mendes' grandfather.
I know that actually I teared up at the very end of the film, seeing the credit at the end about that.
Who was a soldier in the British Army. It almost felt like, remember the documentary that Peter Jackson did last year when they were young?
Yeah.
In that same
They
vein.
they colorized some of it?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And these were young 14, 17-year-old high school kids that were going off to war, putting their lives on the line in defense of liberty, and freedom and justice. And it would really, I had nothing but admiration, and I loved these characters in 1917. I was crying so much at the end of this film. I don't know if I had any tears left. That's what this film pretty much did to me. And even talking about it makes me want to cry right now. But anyway, I think it's the best film. It should win, but something tells me that Quentin Tarantino, who always loves to write novellas for his films, will take this. What about you, Keith?
I saw the worst picks on this list. I saw Knives Out and Marriage Story, and they were the least original things I've ever seen. I was completely disinterested because I had just seen it all before. From the way you're speaking, though, my money's definitely on Parasite because there are people, not just in this room, who have seen it and spoken of it, who I know have never in their entire beings watched a movie with subtitles before and thoroughly
100%.
enjoyed it
Yeah.
and told me that I need to see it. So I think it's between that and 1917, probably.
All right.
Hopefully it'll be Parasite because there's so many wonderful non-English films that do not get recognized at all and do not get seen just because they're not in English. And I think it would be wonderful, especially for a screenplay to win this. For a
I
non-English
wonder.
speaking film.
I don't. You may know this. Has a non-English film ever won Best Screenplay or Best Adapted Screenplay? I've never thought about it.
Did Life is
I
Beautiful?
was going
I
to say
think
it
Life
would have
is
been Life is
Beautiful.
Beautiful if it did.
Maybe.
I actually don't think so. I think that only won for
Best
Just
what's his
international,
face?
and
Foreign
Roberto
Best
Benigni,
Actor.
Yeah.
Roberto Benigni.
who was known for jumping over chairs.
Now there's a trivia question.
Yeah. So the top 3 movies for me this year, we've already been discussing them, and I wouldn't be surprised if all 3 of them walk away with one. One's gonna get the writing, one's gonna get the directing, one's gonna get the best picture. It's just a matter of who. That would be like my, if I had to do like one crazy Adam Sandler Uncut Gems bet, that would be my bet.
Oh,
And
We shall see.
yeah, we'll see.
a snub, honestly.
Yeah.
But now, speaking of segueing to actors, let's get into the acting categories.
All right.
Best Supporting Actor, and the nominees are Tom Hanks for A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, Sir Anthony Hopkins for The Two Popes, Al Pacino for The Irishman, Joe Pesci for The Irishman, and Brad Pitt for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is locked,
That's so tough.
locked, hands down, take it to the bank. Brad Pitt, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah, no, it's like, and it's so
An
fun
honorary
because
Oscar.
it's so fun because these 5 are such a names. So somebody said you could have this list from 1995. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, and the nominees are Tom Hanks.
I want to
Anthony
see them in a
Hopkins, Al
movie
Pacino.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Brad Pitt's just gonna walk right through them, and it's
I mean,
interesting.
in fairness, Brad Pitt was incredible in that film. That was an amazing performance on his part. I think.
I think it was just that perfect blend of when a part is written for an actor and the actor has hit a level of maturity, and it just collides into this perfect mix. I think this year between Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Ad Astra, Brad Pitt has found a way to turn his youthful energy into this kind of zen quality that he had throughout both Ad Astra and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, playing 2 completely different people, but undeniably being Brad Pitt. And that's a movie star quality that you really don't see that often, and it doesn't really get rewarded. So when you hit that level of maturity, I think it's just an unstoppable force, and my hands are just...
Was it? Didn't Tarantino originally want Tom Cruise for that part?
I don't know. I know Tom Cruise was interested. I know he said that Brad Pitt brought a lot to it, and that he didn't really see the characters until Leo and Brad walked on, and Leo had like this, uncomfortable in my own skin, and Brad Pitt's right behind him, like cool as a cucumber, and like a lot of it came from that, like their portrayals of the characters.
Yeah, you feel like those characters fit them like gloves.
Yeah.
You know, which is part of the fun of it.
I'm going to take a guess where you're going with this.
Where am I going with this?
It's a beautiful